Lexie's
Oh
horses, hold stand
my
down!
God.
Margaret was not looking for a story that day. She was just driving home. That is the most important thing to understand. She was not a journalist. She was not an animal rights activist. She was just a veterinarian in a gray shirt and work pants, thinking about what to cook for dinner, listening to a radio station that played songs from the 1980s and wishing the day would end faster. She had been up since 5 in the morning looking at x-rays. She had listened to 3 different people tell her their dogs were getting old and sick. She had given 14 injections to cats who hated needles and owners who hated paying bills. All she wanted was to go home and sit on her couch with something warm to drink. That is why she almost missed it. The road from town to her house was empty that day. Route 19 stretched out with nothing on it, just empty asphalt, brown fields on both sides, and the sun starting to turn orange as it moved toward the horizon. September was dying. The heat had finally broken after 3 months of air so thick you could drink it. Now the air was cooling down, and there was a wind that smelled like something burning far away. Maybe a farm fire. Maybe just the smell of the season changing. Margaret drove with her window down because the truck's air conditioning was broken again, and she had forgotten to take it to the mechanic for the 3rd week in a row. She was singing quietly to a song on the radio when she saw the shape. It was not on the road. It was not quite at the edge of the road. It was somewhere between the white line and the grass, like something that had walked this far and then could not walk anymore. Margaret's brain did not understand what she was looking at first. Her eyes sent the information, there is something there, but her mind was still thinking about dinner, still thinking about going home, still thinking about anything except the road in front of her. Then the shape moved, just a little bit, just a shifting of weight, the way something alive shifts weight when it is tired. Margaret's foot went to the brake without her thinking about it. The truck slowed down, the radio kept playing, the wind kept blowing, and Margaret's eyes focused on the shape the way a camera lens focuses, bringing it from blurry to clear to undeniably, horrifyingly real. It was a horse, but not like any horse Margaret had ever seen in her 15 years of being a veterinarian. Not like any horse she had ever seen in her whole life, actually. This horse looked like something that belonged in a different time, a different world, a place where animals were not supposed to exist anymore. This horse looked like living proof of something that should have been impossible. Every single rib showed through the coat. Not the way a horse's ribs might show in late winter. Not the way a rescue horse might look when it first arrives at a sanctuary. This was different. This was the kind of rib cage you could count by looking at it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ribs visible under thin, dull brown hair that had lost all its shine. The horse's neck was like the neck of a bird, just bone wrapped in skin that hung loose, like the skin did not fit the bone anymore because there was nothing underneath. Margaret pulled the truck all the way over to the side of the road and turned off the engine. The radio stopped. The silence was huge. The horse did not run away. The horse did not even really look at the truck. The horse just stood there, and Margaret could see, now that she was really looking, now that she had stopped thinking about dinner, she could see that this horse was not standing. This horse was barely standing. The horse was holding itself up the way a person holds themselves up when they are so tired that lying down is the only thing they want to do, but lying down means dying. So they stay vertical, because staying vertical means staying alive. The horse's hip bones stuck out like 2 sharp triangles on the sides of the body. Margaret knew that horses had hip bones. She knew where they were. She had felt them on 1,000 horses. But she had never seen them like this, visible from 100 meters away, sticking out so far they looked like they might tear through the skin at any moment. The horse's legs were not thin. They were not even skinny legs that belonged to a skinny horse. These were legs that looked like they were made of wooden sticks wrapped in loose plastic wrap. The hooves were cracked. One of the front hooves was curling under at the edge, the way a hoof curves when nothing has taken care of it for a very long time. Margaret got out of the truck. She did not lock it. She just opened the door and walked toward the horse. And as she got closer, she started noticing details that made her chest feel tight in a way she did not like. There were flies around the horse's eyes. The horse was not shaking them away. The horse was not doing anything. The horse was just standing there like standing was something that took all the strength available in the entire body. There was a halter on the horse's face. It was old and cracked, made of leather that had split in several places. A piece of rope hung from it, frayed at the end, moving a little bit in the wind. The halter had marks in the hair of the horse's face, deep marks, worn areas where the rope had been tied tight and left there, not for hours, for months, maybe longer, maybe for years, Margaret's brain was telling her, and she was trying very hard not to listen to that voice. The horse's eyes were sunken. Margaret could see the shape of the eye socket underneath the skin. The eye itself was still clear, which was a surprise. But there was nothing in that eye. No brightness, no hope, no fear even. Just the kind of empty look that comes when something has stopped expecting anything from the world anymore. The look of something that has forgotten what it is like to believe anything good could happen. Margaret stepped closer, and the horse turned its head slightly, not with interest. Just the mechanical turning of a head that had learned long ago not to react to anything. The horse's breathing was shallow. Margaret could barely see the sides of the chest moving. She had seen horses die. She had been present for deaths. This breathing looked like the breathing of something very close to that moment, and then Margaret saw something that made everything stop. Something that made her pull out her phone even though her hands were shaking. Something that made her start taking pictures even though she did not yet know why. Something that made her understand, in a moment that would change the next 6 months of her life, that she was not just looking at a starved horse. She was looking at evidence. There was a brand on the horse's shoulder. It was old, burned into the skin years ago, but it was still completely visible. Margaret knew that brand. She had seen it on horses that were worth money. She had seen it on horses that won races. She had seen it on horses that belonged to families with names that everyone in this county knew. The brand was a horseshoe with a line through it, the Ridgemont mark, the Ridgemont Estate brand. Ridgemont Estate was the biggest ranch in this part of the state. It had been in the same family for 4 generations. It was the kind of place that hired good people, paid them well, and maintained its facilities. It was the kind of place that everyone said took care of its animals, right? It was the kind of place that had no reason, in this world, to have one of its branded horses standing on the side of Route 19, looking like it was waiting to die. Margaret's phone started taking pictures. Click, 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 the ribs, the hip bones, the halter marks, the brand. She took 23 pictures before she even realized she was shaking so badly that the pictures were blurry. Then she called animal control. She told them there was a horse on Route 19, mile marker 12. She told them to hurry. She told them it was bad. She told them the horse was a Ridgemont brand. And the person on the phone, a woman Margaret had talked to before, stopped talking. There was a silence on the phone that stretched out like a string being pulled too tight. "How bad?" the woman finally asked, and her voice sounded different. Scared, maybe, or like she already knew the answer and did not want to hear it said out loud. "Worse than bad," Margaret said. "This is the worst I have ever seen." As she waited for animal control to arrive, Margaret stood next to the horse. She did not touch it. She did not want to cause pain. She just stood there and looked at what someone had done. She looked at the choice that someone had made, over and over, day after day, to let this happen. She looked at the choice to starve, to hurt, to mark, and to leave. And she made a decision right there, standing in the cooling September air, that she was going to find out who had done this. She was going to know why. She was going to find the answer even if it cost her something. The horse stood beside her, barely breathing, and the sun kept setting, and Margaret understood that everything in her life had just changed in the moment she did not look away.
The emergency veterinary clinic was 30 minutes away from Route 19, and every single one of those minutes felt long. Margaret sat in the back of the animal control trailer with the horse she now thought of as Iris, even though Iris did not have a name yet, even though Iris had probably never had a real name at all. She sat there in the dark, bumpy space, just watching the mare breathe. That was all she could do. Watch and count the breaths. Watch and memorize the way the horse's ribs moved under the skin. Watch and understand that with every mile closer to the clinic, she was racing against something that might already be too late. When they arrived, the vet on duty was a man named Dr. Raymond. He was 62 years old and had been taking care of animals for 43 years. He had seen things, a lot of things, broken bones, infections, diseases that made you want to look away. Owners who did terrible things on purpose and owners who did terrible things by accident. He had a face that did not show much emotion anymore, because when you see enough bad things, your face gets tired of showing shock. But when he looked at Iris, his face changed. He just stood there. He did not say anything. He did not run his hands over the horse. He did not check her heart rate or temperature. He just stood there and looked, and his expression moved from professional calm to something deeper and darker. His jaw got tight. His hands made fists and then opened again. He looked like someone had just shown him something he had been hoping never to see. "How long?" he said to Margaret. His voice was quiet. "I found her today," Margaret said, "on Route 19. I don't know how long she's been like this." Dr. Raymond made a sound like someone had punched him in the stomach. "Weeks," he said. "Maybe longer. A horse doesn't get like this in days." He turned to Margaret, and his eyes were different now. Harder. "Someone did this on purpose. This isn't neglect. Neglect is leaving something alone. This is something else. This is active. This is deliberate." The examination took 2 hours. 2 hours of Margaret standing to the side, taking notes on a clipboard, try to keep her hands steady enough to write. 2 hours of Dr. Raymond working slowly, carefully, documenting everything. He took photographs. He wrote measurements. He drew diagrams. He worked like he was gathering evidence for something, not just treating an animal, because that is exactly what he was doing. The first finding was the weight. Iris was supposed to weigh around 1,000 pounds, maybe a little more or less depending on her frame. Right now, she weighed 650 pounds. Dr. Raymond said the number out loud so Margaret could write it down, and then he said another number. She was 350 pounds underweight. That is like an entire grown man missing from her body. That is like someone had opened up the horse and removed almost 400 pounds of muscle and bone and everything that makes a creature alive. This is not starvation that happened by chance, Dr. Raymond said. He was looking at the hooves now, running his fingers over the cracks, over the curling edges. Look at the hoof condition. This tells me the horse stood in one place for a long time. Probably confined, probably not moving much. The constant standing without movement creates this kind of deterioration. He looked up at Margaret. "How long does someone have to neglect a horse to get these results?" "Months. We're talking months of this happening." Then came the finding about the halter. Dr. Raymond used a small metal tool to examine the inside of the horse's mouth. He was looking at the roof of the mouth, the soft tissue where the bit would rest if a bit was in there. What he found made him make that punched in the stomach sound again. He called Margaret over. "Look at this," he said. Margaret looked. There were marks. Deep marks. Scarring. Tissue that had been damaged and partially healed and then damaged again over and over. The marks were in a pattern that matched a horse bit, the metal piece that goes in a horse's mouth. "Someone tied this horse's mouth shut while she was eating," Dr. Raymond said. His voice sounded different now. Not like a vet, like someone else, someone angry, or they forced a bit in too tight and left it in too long. You don't get marks like this from normal riding. You get marks like this from something being held in place against the animal's will for extended periods. This has been happening for years, Margaret. Not weeks. Years. Margaret felt something break inside her chest. She had to sit down. She literally could not stand up anymore after hearing that. But Dr. Raymond kept finding things. The sores from the halter on the horse's face. The way they were infected. The pattern of them suggesting the halter was never removed. The scars on the horse's legs. Old injuries, partially healed, now infected again because the immune system was so destroyed. The teeth grinding marks in the molars, showing a horse grinding her teeth from stress and pain. The muscle deterioration that was not just from lack of food, but from something deeper, something systematic. Someone was controlling this horse through pain and starvation. Dr. Raymond said finally. He was looking at all his notes, all his photographs, all his findings spread out in front of him. This is not one bad owner. This is someone who knew exactly what they were doing. This is someone who tested how far they could go with this horse. That night, Margaret did not go home. She sat in the waiting area of the emergency clinic with bad coffee that tasted like it had been made yesterday, and she opened her laptop, and she started searching for the Ridgemont brand. She searched for the history of Ridgemont Estate. She searched for the family that owned it. She searched for every horse that had ever been connected to that brand, and she found something strange. Between 2018 and 2023, Ridgemont Estate had reported 17 horses as sold to private ownership. But in the same time period, she found 17 missing horse reports filed by different people in different towns. The descriptions matched. The dates matched. It was like following a trail of something that nobody had thought to follow because the Ridgemont name was too big, too respected, too connected to the people who ran things. She was still searching at 3 in the morning when her phone buzzed. An email from a sender with no name. Just a message that said, "Stop asking questions. You don't understand how deep this goes. For your daughter's safety, please stop." Margaret read that email 5 times. Then she read it 5 more times. Her hands were shaking. Her daughter. They knew about her daughter. They knew her name. They knew her daughter existed. That meant they knew everything about Margaret. They knew where she lived. They knew what mattered to her. She saved the email. She forwarded it to her lawyer, who had been helping her with small cases for years. She did not sleep. She sat in that waiting area of the emergency clinic and drank bad coffee and tried to understand what she had walked into when she pulled over on Route 19. In the morning, Dr. Raymond found her asleep in a chair. "She's stable," he said quietly, not wanting to wake her all the way. "The refeeding protocol is working. But Margaret, you need to understand something. This horse is the evidence of something much bigger than one starved animal. This is a pattern. This is systematic. Whoever did this to this horse is probably doing it to others right now." Margaret opened her eyes. She looked at Dr. Raymond, and she made a decision that would change everything. "Then we have to stop them," she said. "We have to find out who did this, and we have to make it so they can never do it again." Dr. Raymond looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something quiet that made everything real. "That is going to cost you something. People like this, they have power. Be careful." Margaret was not careful. She was done being careful. Someone had sent her a threat about her daughter, and that threat had just told her everything she needed to know. They were afraid of what she would find if she kept looking. She was going to keep looking, and no matter what it cost. Margaret did not sleep for 3 days. This is not something that sounds dramatic when you write it down. It is just a sentence. But 3 days of not sleeping is not the same as being tired. 3 days of not sleeping changes how your brain works. It changes what you see. It changes what feels real and what feels like a dream you're having while awake. Margaret's eyes felt like they had sand in them. Her hands shook when she held her coffee cup. She kept forgetting what she was saying in the middle of sentences. But she could not stop. She could not sleep. Because the moment she stopped moving, the moment she closed her eyes, she would see the anonymous email. "For your daughter's safety, please stop." Someone knew where her daughter went to school. Someone knew her name. Someone was watching close enough to know that Margaret had a daughter, which meant they were watching close enough to know everything. So Margaret did not sleep. She researched. The Ridgemont Estate was exactly what she had read online. 3,000 acres of prime ranch land. One of the most valuable properties in the entire county. The family had owned it for 4 generations. The current owner was Thomas Ridgemont Sr., who was 73 years old and sat on the boards of 3 different banks. His son, Thomas Ridgemont Jr., ran the day-to-day operations. The family was in the newspaper regularly. Ridgemont Estate wins Regional Ranching Award. Ridgemont family donates $500,000 to hospital. Thomas Ridgemont Jr. elected to State Livestock Association Board. These are not people that regular people questioned. These are the kind of people who got written about in business sections and society pages. But Margaret found something strange in the county records. A pattern, a trail of something that nobody had thought to follow, because following it meant questioning the kind of people you do not question. Between 2018 and 2023, Ridgemont Estate had reported 17 horses as sold to private ownership. 17 horses. The dates were listed. The descriptions were listed. Margaret wrote them all down on a piece of paper, and then she did something that took 3 days of searching through different county websites and calling animal control offices in other towns. She looked for missing horse reports from those same time periods. 17 missing horses. The descriptions matched. The dates matched. The breed descriptions matched. It was not a coincidence. Coincidences do not line up this perfectly. This was a pattern. This was something deliberate. This was someone taking horses and then claiming they had sold them, when actually they had probably... Margaret could not finish that sentence in her head. She could not make herself complete it. On the fourth day, she called a woman named Susan. Susan had filed a missing horse report 6 years ago. The report was about a paint mare named Duchess. Susan answered the phone like she was expecting bad news. Maybe she had been expecting bad news for 6 years. "I don't know if I should be talking to you," Susan said when Margaret explained why she was calling. "I mean, I've thought about this horse every day for 6 years. But some things you learn not to talk about." "What do you mean?" Margaret asked. There was a long silence. Then Susan said, "The Ridgemont boys helped us look for her. Thomas Jr. and the ranch manager, they were so helpful. They said they would check their grazing lands. They said they would ask around. 2 weeks later they called and said they had found her. They said coyotes had gotten to her, that there was nothing left to recover. They were so sorry. They were so nice about it." "Did you believe them?" Margaret asked. Another silence. A longer one this time. Then Susan said something that made Margaret's chest feel tight. "No, I never believed it for 1 second. But I had a business. I had a family. If I had accused the Ridgemounts of something, if I had made trouble, they could have destroyed me. Not with violence. Legally. Financially. The Ridgemounts know judges. They know lawyers. They know all the important people in this county. If I had accused them, I would have been the crazy woman making trouble against one of the most respected families in the state. I would have lost everything. So I let it go. But I never believed it." Margaret felt like her whole body had turned into ice. This was not a story about one starved horse. This was a story about a family that had learned they could do anything and nobody would stop them because nobody would question them. "I want to tell you something," Margaret said to Susan. "Something that I'm investigating. Something that I think you need to know." She told Susan about Iris. She told her about the condition. She told her about the marks from the halter. She told her about what Dr. Raymond had said about systematic abuse over years. She told her about the 17 missing horses that matched 17 sold horses. She told her about the anonymous email threatening her daughter. When she finished, Susan was crying. "Duchess was a good horse," Susan said. "She was gentle. She didn't deserve." Susan stopped talking. She could not finish that sentence either. "I'm going to find out what happened," Margaret said. "I'm going to make sure this stops." "Be careful," Susan said. "These people, they protect their own, and they protect what they have. They don't like trouble." But Margaret was done being careful. She contacted other people on the missing horse list. 2 of them refused to call her back. One did. An older man named Frank who had lost a horse 10 years ago. "I knew it was them," Frank said on the phone. "I just knew it. But nobody was going to listen to me accuse the Ridgemounts. Nobody. So I just accepted it. I paid the loss out of pocket and moved on. But I knew. I've always known." Margaret started a file. A real file with names and dates and descriptions. She started documenting the pattern. She took screenshots of the anonymous email. She showed everything to her lawyer. Her lawyer read through everything in about 20 minutes. And then he looked at Margaret over his glasses like she had just told him she was planning to walk into traffic. "This is bigger than I thought," he said. "You're not just talking about one animal. You're talking about a pattern of potential fraud, animal cruelty, and intimidation. The email is a threat. That is a federal offense if you can prove they sent it. But Margaret, this family has power. Real power. If you push on this, they will push back. And they will not play nice. They are starving horses," Margaret said. "They're doing it on purpose. They're threatening me to keep me quiet. I'm not going to stop." Her lawyer nodded slowly. "Then we need to do this the right way. We need evidence that cannot be questioned. We need witnesses who will testify. We need documentation that is so clear that even their money and their connections cannot make it go away." That night, Margaret sat in her house with her daughter asleep upstairs. She drank wine, something she almost never did, and she thought about what it meant to be afraid. She thought about what it meant to have someone tell you to stop asking questions for your daughter's safety. She thought about all the other people who had given up, who had accepted the story about coyotes, who had decided that fighting the Ridgemounts was not worth the cost. She understood why they had done that. She really did. But she also understood that if everyone gave up, then the pattern would just continue. The horses would keep disappearing. The abuse would keep happening. And the Ridgemounts would keep getting away with it because they were the kind of people that you do not question. Margaret decided right then, sitting alone in her house, that she was going to be the person who questioned them. She did not know yet that her investigation was about to blow open a story that would change her county forever. She did not know that within 6 weeks, state police would arrive at Ridgemont Estate with a warrant. She did not know that documents would be found that would make the anonymous email look like a small crime compared to everything else they had hidden. She only knew that she could not stop now. Not after what she had learned. Not after what she had seen in Iris's eyes. Some things, once you know them, you cannot unknow them. Some injustices, once you see them, you cannot look away from them. And Margaret was not going to look away anymore. The phone call came on a Thursday morning in November. Margaret was at her clinic examining a cat with an ear infection when her lawyer called. His voice was different, excited, scared, both at the same time. They executed the warrant this morning, he said. State police, animal welfare agents. They arrived at Ridgemont Estate at 6 in the morning with federal agents. Margaret, they found everything. Margaret put down her stethoscope. The cat hissed at her. She did not care about the cat anymore. What do you mean everything, she said. Documents, her lawyer said. Records, photographs. Years and years of photographs and records documenting what they did to the horses. I don't have all the details yet, but the state police commander told me they have never seen anything like this before. This is not one person making mistakes. This is a system. This is a business model based on animal abuse. Margaret sat down in the examination room. She sat down on the floor, actually, because her legs would not hold her anymore. By noon, the news was everywhere. Local news first, then regional news, then national news was picking it up. Major ranch under investigation for animal cruelty. Ridgemont Estate raided by state police. Federal agents discover extensive animal abuse operation. The reporters did not know the full story yet. They were just reporting what they could see. Police cars, federal agents, a famous family's ranch being searched. But Margaret's phone would not stop ringing. Journalists wanted to talk to her. Animal welfare organizations wanted information. Other people who had lost horses wanted to know if Ridgemont Estate was involved in their cases too. By evening, Margaret was watching the news on her phone as she sat in the emergency clinic where Iris was being treated. A reporter was standing at the gates of Ridgemont Estate, and behind her, you could see the massive barn complex, the beautiful fences, the carefully maintained property. The reporter was saying words like animal cruelty, systematic abuse, criminal investigation. It felt impossible. It felt like watching someone tell a story about a different world, not the world Margaret lived in. Then they showed the photographs. The news station had obtained, nobody knew how, some of the photographs from a police raid. They showed horses, not alive horses, dead horses, skeletal remains, the kind of bodies that had been left in pastures to decompose. Row after row of horse skeletons, some with just bones, some with dried hide still attached, some so far decomposed that they were barely recognizable as animals anymore. Margaret had to look away, but she also had to keep watching. The photographs showed something else too. There were records, detailed records, photographs of individual horses taken monthly, showing their condition declining over time. Weight measurements, notations about what they were fed, or more accurately, what they were not fed. The records were clinical and horrible. They were dated. They had names and signatures on them. They were evidence that someone had documented this process, had watched it happen, had recorded it like it was just another part of doing business. By the next morning, Thomas Ridgemont Jr. had been arrested. The news showed the photograph of him being led out of his house by federal agents. He was wearing a suit. His face was shocked, like he could not believe that something he had been doing in private could suddenly become a public crime. He had a lawyer immediately. Of course he did. The Ridgemonts had lawyers. The Ridgemonts had money. But for the first time, none of that seemed to matter. His father, Thomas Ridgemont Sr., was being investigated but had not been arrested yet. The investigators were trying to determine if he had known, if he had approved, if he had been part of the system, or if his son had done this without his knowledge. Margaret did not believe the without his knowledge theory. Not for a second. On the second day of the investigation, a man showed up at the emergency clinic. Margaret was sitting with Iris, watching the mare eat small portions of soft hay, when someone knocked on the door. It was a police officer. The officer had questions for Margaret about what she had found on Route 19. She answered them all. She gave him copies of her photographs. She told him everything about the brand, about the condition, about the anonymous email threatening her daughter. "We found the email," the officer said. "It was traced to a computer at the ranch. We're still investigating who sent it, but it came from inside the Ridgemont operation. Someone was trying to intimidate you into stopping your investigation. Someone, not a nameless someone. Someone who worked there. Someone who had access to computers. Someone who knew Margaret's phone number. Someone who knew about her daughter." The list of people was probably not very long. By day 3, there was another development. A news reporter had obtained complete copies of the Ridgemont records. Not just photographs of the dead horses. Records of the living ones. Records that showed a system where horses were bought at auctions. Usually horses that nobody wanted, older horses, rescue cases, and then they were slowly starved, confined, and documented as they died. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was the purpose. The records showed that this was being done on purpose to lower their weight so they could be sold to slaughterhouses. Underweight horses are worth less money. Lower weight equals lower price. By starving horses down to skeletal weight, Ridgemont Estate was eliminating all the value from the animal before sending them to slaughter. This way, they kept more money for themselves. It was not random cruelty. It was cruelty for profit. Calculated. Planned. Systematic. Margaret read this information while sitting next to Iris, and she had to stand up and leave the room because she was going to be sick. She went to the bathroom and locked the door, and she cried in a way she had not cried since she was a child. Big, gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep inside her chest. When she came back, Iris was looking at her. The horse's eyes had changed since the day Margaret found her. They were brighter now. Iris was learning to trust again. Iris was learning that some humans were different. Some humans would not hurt her. Some humans would actually care whether she lived or died. "I'm sorry," Margaret said to the horse. "I'm so sorry that someone did this to you." By the end of the week, the story had exploded into something huge. Journalists were digging into every part of the Ridgemont operation. They were finding records of horses sold to Ridgemont from shelters and rescue organizations. They were finding documentation of insurance claims for horses that had died of natural causes, when actually they had been intentionally starved. Other people were coming forward. A veterinarian who had been pressured to sign off on false health certificates. A feed supplier who had delivered less food than the records showed. A ranch hand who had witnessed animals being left without water in the summer heat. One man came forward with his name. His name was Richard Thornton, and he was the head ranch manager at Ridgemont Estate. He had been there for 14 years. He had seen everything, and he had finally decided that he could not stay quiet anymore. On television, Richard looked terrified. His hands shook as he talked about what he had witnessed. He talked about meetings where decisions were made. Meetings where Thomas Ridgemont Jr. had stood in front of maps showing different pastures, pointing at certain horses and saying, "These ones. We'll let these ones expire naturally. Photograph them monthly, so we have documentation that it was not our fault." "I knew it was wrong," Richard said on camera, and he was crying. "I knew it from the first time, but I needed my job. I had bills. I had a family. If I had spoken up, they would have destroyed me. That is how it worked with them. You stay quiet, but they make your life impossible. So I stayed quiet, and I will never forgive myself for that." As Margaret watched this interview, something changed in how people understood the story. It was not just about powerful people committing a crime. It was about a system of fear that allowed the crime to continue. It was about people being trapped by the threat of financial ruin if they spoke out. It was about an entire community choosing silence because speaking up was too dangerous. And Margaret had chosen differently. Margaret had been threatened, and instead of staying silent, she had kept investigating. And because she had kept investigating, the entire system was falling apart. By Friday, the state attorney general announced they were filing charges against Thomas Ridgemont Jr. for animal cruelty, operating an illegal animal facility, and wire fraud. The trial would begin in 90 days. Margaret did not go home that night. She stayed at the clinic with Iris, and she sat in the dark, and she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, justice was actually possible. Even for a horse wearing a number carved into her hoof. Even for the voiceless. Even when the people committing the crime had power and money and lawyers. Justice was finally, impossibly, becoming real.